Hi, everyone. I am showing 6:30, so to be respectful of everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I am John Jewick, Assistant City Manager with the City of Cincinnati. It's great to be here with you all. I want to thank Councilwoman Liz Keating, who kind of inspired this panel tonight. I really appreciate her leadership on this, and the many city staff that have worked really hard to put together a very robust presentation. We have put together a panel of representatives from city departments that are actively working on this very important topic of extreme storms and recent flooding. And this is obviously affecting our city, our region, and many areas around the country. So thank you to all of you for participating and joining this meeting. Before we go any further, I want to highlight some brief housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded for those who were not able to join us this evening, and it will be played later on city cable. So if you know of someone that wanted to participate but was not able to join, there will be an opportunity to watch it later on. The presentation and links to the recorded video and some additional resources will be shared on Msd's website. This is a very important topic, and we will hear from our panelists first, mainly city staff that have been working very in a concerted way on these issues. Following our panelists, we are also joined by Councilwoman Liz Keating, who will also have some words to share and probably some questions she has received. We also plan to have time, hopefully at least a half an hour at the end, for questions and answers. Before we get to the question and answer period, there are two ways for participants to ask questions or make comments during the Q&A session. You can raise your hand and wait to be called on by clicking the raise hand icon. For those that will be joining on audio only on a phone, two additional steps you will need to take. Participants will need to press *9 on their phone's keypad to raise your hand. If you are joining by phone, we will acknowledge you as the speaker by stating the last 3 digits of your phone number. And when we unmute you, you will hear a message over the phone asking you to press *6 to unmute. You may also use the question and answer feature in Zoom along the bar at the top or bottom of your screen by clicking on the Q&A icon. So those are just some housekeeping items. Just in terms of the topics for tonight, what we will be covering: extreme storms, recent flooding, and severe weather events are becoming more frequent and intense locally, regionally, and nationally. Increasingly, city agencies are called upon to respond to heavy rains, flooding, snow melt, and other extreme weather. Residents and businesses can report issues, and certainly we work very hard to ensure follow-up, and we always take these issues very seriously and do everything we can to help at the City of Cincinnati. Residents and property owners can help mitigate impacts and better prepare for extreme storm events, and we want to work together with you to do so. And agencies at the city, the county, and other governmental entity levels are working together to address this significant regional issue. So I look forward to hearing from everyone tonight. It's very good to be with you all. I really appreciate the city staff who are here, and we look forward to a very productive session. So without further ado, I will turn it over.
So thanks, John. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thanks for spending the night with us here to talk about the extreme storms that we're facing. My name is Michael Forster, and I'm the Director of the Office of Environment and Sustainability. My office's mission is to make the City of Cincinnati a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable city through the enactment of the Green Cincinnati Plan, which lays out 80 recommendations to reduce the City of Cincinnati's carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. Since 2018, we have accomplished or on track to accomplish more than 75% of these recommendations laid out in this ambitious plan. My job here today is to lay the groundwork for what we're seeing in these extreme storms and how it's impacting us here in Cincinnati. Next slide. We all know that Cincinnati is an old town. The city experienced its fastest growth between 1850 and 1960, and this is the period when most of our major water infrastructure was built. Many local creeks were encased in concrete and piped to allow for development. And so while you may not see those creeks today, the drainage basins still exist and the water still flows. Next slide. So here what you're looking at is a picture of the Mill Creek watershed. And this image highlights the change in time of our streams. Before development, this area contained over 330 miles of streams that would funnel the water into the Mill Creek and into the Ohio River. Currently, the lower Mill Creek watershed contains only about 75 miles of streams, an almost 75% reduction. When water falls now, much of it is diverted into these existing sewers and stormwater infrastructure. Next slide. We have also changed our environment even more by drastically increasing our impervious surfaces as well. So what this image that you're seeing right here, the gray represents pavement, parking lots, buildings, and the green represents the city's tree canopy. Places with the natural ground cover absorb significantly more rain than places with impermeable surfaces where the rain cannot be absorbed by the ground and therefore must flow downhill until it reaches a place where it can either be diverted or absorbed. This increase in impervious surface is essentially increasing the amount of water that our creeks and sewers must handle in a rain event, and it can lead them to be overwhelmed in times of high rainfall. This difference in surface type, this built-in infrastructure, this topography of our land means that the threat and impact of extreme storms are different on a street-by-street level. Next slide. So, in addition to our built environment, the environment that it was built for is changing. A rainstorm and heat wave is different than it used to be. Cincinnati's climate is changing, and all data points to a city that more closely resembles Little Rock, Arkansas in the summer and Washington, D.C. in the winter. Cincinnati's average temperature has already increased 2 degrees since 1950, and it's anticipated to increase another 7. Our rainfall has already increased 13%, but what's most striking is the impact of extreme weather. The warmer air is holding more water. We are giving the storms a larger bucket. Our extreme rain events are dropping 35% more water than they used to, and they're occurring more frequently as well. Next slide. We are seeing the impacts of climate change now here in Cincinnati. The increased rainfall is causing flooding, landslides, and hotter temperatures in our urban core, where it heats up during the day and is unable to cool down at night. Next slide. Hamilton County has seen a significant increase in our 100-year storms, or the largest 1% storms in the last 10 years. So here are images of storms over the past decade. The lightest rain is in the green, and the more intense storms are red to purple. What you notice is the small, powerful microbursts of rain, the purple, the red, the deep red, that occurs fairly randomly throughout the county. When these microbursts combine with the topography and the infrastructure, the surface type, this is where localized flash flooding is likely to occur. Our current system just becomes overwhelmed and it cannot move the water fast away enough. While we can build and improve, and the departments here will share with you what we're doing, we can't build our way out of every storm. So what will we need to do here? So first, the city of Cincinnati is needing to do its part to reduce our own carbon footprint. The 1,000 acre solar array currently being built 40 miles east of Cincinnati is an excellent example of us doing big projects to reduce carbon emissions and save taxpayer dollars. Second, we must gather data around the vulnerabilities of our city in a changing climate. We have conducted studies that analyze heat, tree cover, surface type, landslide threats, but we're also looking at our demographic, our income data, and how that relates to climate vulnerability. We know that our neighborhoods in our city will not be hit equally, and we also know that the impacts on individuals will not be equal as well. The University of Cincinnati is currently working with us to develop a report that will analyze how these issues affect us on a neighborhood level, and we hope to get that published soon. We must engage the public to understand that once was is changing. We must engage people in events like these to provide education and outreach around how to address extreme weather and how to assess the potential impacts on your home and your business. Everyone in the coasts know the steps to take to protect themselves when hurricanes come. What does storm preparation look like here in Cincinnati, and how do we share our messages here with our residents? 4, we must do things differently. The way that we built infrastructure in the city of Cincinnati is shifting. We can't always build a bigger pipe. Sometimes it takes a new way of looking at problems. The Lick Run Greenway is an excellent example of how this can be done. And finally, we must look towards the future and develop policies and regulations that address our changing environment. Current policies and build practices are designed for previous issues. The city administration, city councils, and residents must analyze best practices across the country and come up with our own ideas to determine how to make Cincinnati a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient city.
Thank you very much, Michael. And our next speaker is going to be Art Dahlberg. Art is the Building and Inspections Department Director, and Art is here to talk to us a little bit about what Art does and his department does to coordinate with other agencies. Art?
Thank you, Mary Lynn. If we could go to the next slide, please. So in August of 2016, we had a rather significant storm event. And as a result, over on the Grandin area, we had a construction site that ended up turning to almost a mudslide coming on down the hill. That event caused the city to go back and relook at how we were doing our development process and making sure in the site process that we were far more coordinated. So through those changes, we created what's called a coordinated site review process, which virtually every department that gets involved in development, whether it be the fire department, police department from time to time, MSD, MSU, DOTE, Buildings and Inspections, planning, all of us will look at projects together. We will make sure that we are giving good direction to the people that are proposing the projects, and we will look for places where we may be giving conflicting information for the developer so that we solve the problems early on during that paper review process before we ever get into the world of construction. A coordinated report goes back to the developer, and they make changes to make sure that their project can be successful. Next slide, please. In that process, not only BNI, but especially SMU and MSD are evaluating each one of these projects, not only for system capacity, but also what kind of grading changes are being proposed, how does that change drainage patterns, and looking at making sure that we don't have increased impacts on the surrounding and downstream properties. Next slide, please. So the Buildings and Inspections has spent a great deal of time with SMU, and we have developed a collaborative approach where we perform many of the inspections that in partnership with SMU, and quite frankly, being the inspector in the field for many of those things. Part of that was to make sure that we were sending a consistent message in the field, but also utilizing the size and scale of our department inspection unit to be able to manage projects more effectively. So one of the things that we do is we're looking at when we know a storm is coming on in, we will have inspectors go out to many of the challenging sites And we'll be looking at the erosion sediment control features, making sure that they're tight. If they're not tight, we immediately give the developer instructions of how to tighten them up so that they can perform best when the rain event occurs. Likewise, we do post-storm evaluations so that if there were problems with the erosion sediment control, if they need to be refreshed, redone, we get them to do that. So in case there's a second event right behind it, we're ready for that. Additionally, we do damage assessment inspections post significant storm events, primarily to support any kind of declaration request that the city through the county may be asking, that then opens federal purse strings to be able to support damaged communities. Through our normal process, we are doing a fair number of inspections, and the previous slide kind of showed that. So erosion sediment control, for example, 3,000 inspections a year are being done. So we really try and monitor this and work hand in hand with SMU and MSD on those issues. Next slide, please. So this kind of diagrams out what we mean when we're talking about a floodplain. And so we talk about a floodplain in reference to a 100-year storm. And I think it's important to understand that expression gives people a lot of confusion, thinking that we will only have that kind of a storm once every 100 years. But what it's really saying is there's a 1% annual chance of area flooding in any given year. So that's why sometimes it feels like we've had 2 or 3 100-year storms within a couple of years. So there's a couple of terms that are helpful to understand. You'll see that there's a floodplain that goes from edge to edge, and it's made up of the floodway and the flood fringe. The floodway is really the area that in a major event needs to be clear so that water can flow and be able to get proper drainage occurring. So development within the floodway very, very seldom happens unless it's site improvements. While development in the flood fringe can occur, but it's being done when we elevate buildings above the base flood elevation, and that dotted line that you see going across is what the base flood elevation is meant to represent. Next slide, please. So a little bit about flood insurance. As was stated earlier, we, City, Hamilton County, are a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. As a result, any resident can purchase flood insurance. They don't necessarily have to be in a high-risk area, floodplain, to be able to get that insurance. So we know that some of our minor streams which flood have impacts on property. So flood insurance can be done. While it's part of the national program, you go through an insurance agent who can then support you in getting flood insurance. Next slide, please. So the flood insurance works in a couple of different ways. You can either get flood insurance just for the structure, or you can get the flood insurance for structure and contents. And renters can get content insurance even if the property owner doesn't get it. The policy is in effect. Whether or not a federal disaster declaration is done doesn't stop the policy for paying on out. Like any insurance program, it has a number of limitations on it. So anybody who is talking to an insurance carrier, that's always an important piece. I would say for what we call our high-risk areas, when you look at a FEMA map, that's the areas designated A or E, there's a 1 in 4 chance of flooding in the 30-year life of a mortgage for those high-risk areas. Government-backed mortgages require flood insurance in those high-risk areas. And likewise, depending on what the policy is, the amount of coverage, meaning the thresholds of your coverage, and whether it's covering just structure or interior will vary. Next slide, please. And finally, questions about flood insurance. The best source, of course, is FEMA, and we have an internet address that you can go to, and they just go through a whole series of questions that can provide you some basic information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Art. And I do want to, there is one question that's relevant to you, and we're doing good on time. I just want to ask this one question. A question came in with regards to understanding the importance that topography has to help prevent issues of extreme storms. The question is, what has changed in the process or the requirements for new development? In 20 years, Oakley has been developing. It seems to have become a concert neighborhood. And there's some suggestions that it hasn't flooded as bad as it has now after Oakley Station. So could you talk a little bit about if anything has changed in terms of requirements for new developments in the last 20 years?
Well, I think certainly through the coordinated site review process, we are looking far more closely at overland flow issues, not just capacity of pipe issues. So that long-term will greatly benefit, I think, the community where development is occurring, because when we look at those overland flow issues, we're making sure that the water that's going across the ground before it gets into a conveyance structure, it is not having a negative impact on especially downstream neighbors. So I think the city, and working with MSD and the stormwater utility over time, that there's been a heightened awareness to that, which I think will improve the end product for us all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Art. We're going to go ahead and go to the next speaker now, who is Eric Saylor, City Stormwater Engineer from Stormwater Utility. Is going to talk a little bit about what SMU does and different assets and responses that SMU provides to the City of Cincinnati. Eric?
Mary Lynn, we do have a raised hand if we want to address that now.
Okay, great.
It is from the Musketeer Association. You should be able to unmute now.
I'm sorry, I really didn't have a question. I was late coming in. I was sort of like acknowledging my partners and everyone that I'm sorry I was late, and I just waved. And then I tried to get rid of it and wouldn't go away. So I do apologize for that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
That I was able to get in here because it's been extremely busy. So go, please. I'm listening.
Okay, Eric Saylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the City of Cincinnati Stormwater Management Utility. Next slide, please, Mary Lynn. So just to summarize kind of SMU's roles and responsibilities, taking this from the city code, it's our responsibility to manage and finance a public stormwater infrastructure within the City of Cincinnati. And I think that's an important distinction to make, for instance, between us and our sister utility MSD, and that we are specifically within the City of Cincinnati, whereas MSD goes outside of the city as well. It's our job to help to try to mitigate uncontrolled and unplanned stormwater runoff, to do the best possible to capture and convey that stormwater effectively and efficiently as possible to protect our businesses and all of our customers. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, just kind of at a high level, some of the infrastructure that we maintain in dealing with that collection and conveyance of stormwater and flood protection as well. Next slide, please. All right, so as you see on the left here, this is our flood control infrastructure. The Mill Creek Barrier Dam is a piece of infrastructure that a lot of people know about. You can get a lot of information on that from at our website. You also can see a really cool drone video of it in operation. The Barrier Dam, the completion of it, along with the adjacent flood protection infrastructure, finished in 1948 to address the 1937 floods. It protects about $3 billion with a B of public and private infrastructure, railroad lines, residents, businesses, and the region's largest wastewater treatment plant, the MSD Mill Creek plant. Given that it's an important piece of infrastructure, we take it very seriously. And as far as mitigating the risk associated with that, in 2014, we completed a facility plan. And since then, We have been doing a lot of capital projects, which I'll touch on at a high level in a couple of minutes. And we have 4 full-time staff there that perform year-round maintenance to that. Art mentioned about the Fema certification associated with the city. This is very much tied to that. The Army Corps of Engineers inspects this infrastructure most of the time on an annual basis. They've always given us a good grade, and therefore, if we don't pass that, we are in danger of losing that FEMA certification. We certainly don't want that to happen. So it's a very important piece of infrastructure. In many ways, it's a regional piece of infrastructure because it receives stormwater through the Mill Creek Valley, not only from the city of Cincinnati, but other jurisdictions and municipalities in Hamilton County and even Butler County as well. You see a lot of good work, things like ODOT separating the interstates and everything. All that flow comes to us at the Bear Dam, and the city alone is responsible for that infrastructure and paying for it. We have about 1.5 miles of flood walls and levees near the dam, 14 floodgates that we put up depending on how high the Ohio River is rising. We have an earthen dam on Gurley Road and Sunset Avenue area. We have 3 channelized creeks, one in Roselawn, the Amberley Creek, one in North Side, the West Fork Creek Channel, and one in Madisonville, the Duck Creek Channel. On your right, you will see a summary of our stormwater conveyance that we operate and maintain with our staff and with contractors as well. Next slide, please. So I often get asked this question. I know MSD does as well. It's an excellent question. What's the difference between SMU and MSD? And MSD will touch on the difference between a sanitary sewer and a combined sewer and a storm sewer in a bit. But as far as SMU goes, if you see the picture down on your left, it's kind of a typical situation where you see an inlet in the street, and that inlet in the blue conveys the water to the MSD combined sewer, which you see is the green there. So we are responsible for the inlet and that connection, and MSD has the responsibility of the combined sewer. We also deal with erosion control, as Art mentioned, and work very closely with them. And I'll touch again on that in a second. And the flood control that I mentioned with all of our flood protection infrastructure in the creeks, and especially, of course, the Ohio River, being we are certainly a river city. MSD, on the other hand, they deal with sewage. So we are specifically stormwater. They deal with the sewage and the combined and sanitary sewers. They deal with verified sewer backups, the green infrastructure that helps them with their combined sewer controls and the treatment of wastewater at their 7 treatment plants. We work very closely with them on projects and maintenance operations as well, serving our mutual customers. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about flood control. And this happens not only with the Ohio, but also within our local community as well. Next slide, please. So the first one I wanted to touch on is the one that's on most everybody's mind probably with this meeting, and that's overland flooding. So our responsibility is to take that stormwater, kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, and properly and efficiently and safely convey it. And that will go to either a combined sewer, the MSD sewer, or a storm sewer, or a natural system, whether it be a swale or a creek or river. So a lot of challenges associated with that. We are a built out city. As Michael mentioned, we're an old city. And so it becomes a challenge is where are you going to take this stormwater to? Soil is not always conducive to infiltration. You can get stretches in the wintertime where our ground is frozen and there is nowhere for that water to go if we get a heavy rain other than our sewers. Same within the summer, you get a long stretch of hot weather, get that ground that we all see cracking in our yards and around our houses, and it can't infiltrate. The topography that was touched on earlier too. It's very challenging as far as in the Queen City and the county is concerned. It's not like we're flat like Florida or anything like that. We have a lot of hills and it's beautiful, but it also makes it challenging to manage as far as stormwater is concerned. We sit at the bottom of the watershed. We get a lot of other municipalities and even other county stormwater being brought to us. Goes back to that regional piece of infrastructure that the city alone finances, the barrier dam. And of course, as Michael mentioned, the increasing storm intensity is a challenge for us. You know, if we get rains that are really mild and kind of slow. And even if they're over the course of the couple of days, we do well with that. Our system does well. But when you get those intense storms that just burst on you, it's very difficult. Some of our overland flooding, occurs within private properties. And generally speaking, and I say that generally because every situation is unique. It is responsibility of the private owners. And the city will be involved if there are plumbing codes or building codes, and we work very closely with Art and his folks on that. And we also work with private property owners to strive to help them if they're able to build some infrastructure on private property to bring to us and work with MSD. If we were able to do that, we do that as well. I often get asked, what can I do? On our website, there's a form, not a forum, but a pamphlet that you can get and download and use. But I would say overall, in a nutshell, homeowners can do a lot to maintain their own private infrastructure to help themselves. Keep your yard drains clear, keep your driveway drains clear, make sure your house is properly graded. Don't grade it to where you're now pushing water onto someone else. That would require a permit. But do those kinds of things. Maintain your private infrastructure. We react to all calls that come to us and investigate and to determine if it's a private property matter or if it's a public property matter. And we'll have our phone number up in a minute and our email. So don't hesitate to call us. If you call us, you email us, we will respond and investigate, including with boots on the ground employees. Next slide, please. Go ahead and click it again, please. So the next flooding that we often deal with are creeks, our city-owned creeks. I mentioned Duck Creek and West Fork Channel Creek and Amberley Creek, conveying that stormwater runoff, and the Ohio River with the Barrier Dam and the flood walls and floodgates, occurrence that's happening more frequently. We've noticed that in the last 5 years. Next slide, please. Some recent improvements. We updated our infrastructure standards just literally a few weeks ago, really making it easier for us to maintain our infrastructure and effectively capture that stormwater. We're in the process of internally updating our municipal code of the city and our rules and regulations, making us greener, and also improving our detention rules and regulations to help us deal more with those intense storms that we've talked about. Next slide. Art mentioned this. We updated our erosion control standards and then formed a strong partnership with BNI. And my thanks to Art and his staff. This has been really one of the true success stories, in my opinion, of SMU in the city in the last few years here. We have done a really good job with that. You get a 100-year storm, are you going to have still issues? Of course you are. But we have really minimized the effects of that. And my thanks to Art and his staff for helping us on that and partnering with us. Next slide, please. So we also do some post-construction detention inspections in the storm-only area. So I think this is important that maybe some people will often overlook. Things get built and then we don't turn aside and ignore them anymore. We go out and inspect them on a regular basis to make sure that the owners are maintaining this, and so flooding doesn't occur for lack of a maintenance. And we have enforcement mechanisms that we have in place to deal with that if that's not an issue. But thankfully, we have found that residents and property owners are doing a great job of this. And if you're one of those, keep up the good work. Thank you. Next slide. We also go out and proactively assess the condition of our infrastructure that I listed earlier. We do it internally. The people on the left there are one of our crews. We also have contracts. You see that pipe in the middle? That actually is one of our main lines that we found. And so when you can go out and proactively assess the condition and then repair it, as you see on the right, you can reduce flooding. And we have seen the results of that. So it's been a great and profitable program for us. Next slide, please. So a little plug for our website. You can go to our website and you can see some projects in your neighborhood. And these are just examples of that. Our pump station projects that we worked on in the Queensgate, Lower Price Hill area. See a project there, a pump station, before and after pictures of Oakley. You can see just the difference it makes and reduces the risk of flooding to our customers. Our Barrier Dam projects that we have done and that are ongoing now and that are coming. When a facility has been built in 1948, you have constant work that needs to be done. And my thanks to city leadership for recognizing how critical this piece of infrastructure is to everyone and to the region itself. Next slide, please. Some channel projects you'll see on the before and after. It doesn't even look like the same channel, does it? In Roseline and the work that we did up there in the West Fork Creek channel, and on the drainage system projects in Winton Ridge, North Side, and West Price Hill. And there are others, but these are ones I wanted to mention. I wanted to just spend a couple seconds on the East End project there on Riverside Drive. This is a great example of when everybody does a great job of coordinating our work. We had deteriorated infrastructure. It was a chronic flooding location. We went and put in brand new infrastructure, upsized our existing infrastructure. We took our storm out of the MSD combined sewer and thus reducing combined sewer overflows. Did all that before ODOT and DOT came in and put a brand new pavement in the street. Just a great win for everybody. You see my name and number there. Please call. I encourage you to do so. You can find us on our website and email us too. And as far as SMU is concerned, I mentioned there at the bottom, more good work is on the way. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mary Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'm just looking through the questions. We do have a number of questions that I'd like to just one in particular that's a stormwater related one. Seems to be directed to you. How do you enforce others who don't maintain their properties? You talked about the detention requirements and you do inspections. Can you talk about what kind of enforcement you do for those that don't maintain their properties?
Sure, we have the ability per the city code. We try to work with the property owners and for them to do the work first. That's always our goal. But if that isn't the case, and it does unfortunately happen from time to time, we have the ability per the municipal code to go in and do the work and assess the property owner for the job, for the work that we did and the cost to the stormwater ratepayers.
Okay, and just one more follow-up on that, not directly related, but how do you get on the list to be rezoned to get storm drains? This person lives in an area that apparently is a private street. So is there a process for that?
I would say the best process for that is to contact us at the Stormwater Management Utility. See the number F591-5050, or you can email us and we will work with the Department of Transportation and Engineering and look into that situation. Okay.
And one more question about stormwater detention. What about improving the city's stormwater detention and retention standards, inspected property effectiveness of existing detention, addressing properties with significant runoff that have no detention or retention? Maybe, and I think you said, Eric, that you're in the process of trying to update your standards.
That's correct. Yeah. And we are in the process of doing that to deal with those intense storms, but also to deal with, potential existing situations as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to move on
Thank
to
you.
Our next speaker. We'll have more questions for you, and people can continue to put questions in the question and answer. We're going to try to get to them all as best we can. And the next speaker I'd like to introduce is Diana Christie, Executive Director of the Metropolitan Sewer District. And Diana, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mary Lynn, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. So I want to start by just explaining a little bit about who MSD is and what we do. I think that our mission, which is up on the screen, is important for everyone to review. It's that MSD is to collect, treat, and manage wastewater from greater Cincinnati communities, protecting the environment and public health by returning clean water to local rivers and streams. So unlike Eric, who just talked about stormwater, what we're doing is collecting and treating your wastewater. We do that with 9 treatment plants. We also have additional wet weather facilities. These are high rate treatment facilities that only operate during wet weather. We have over 40 acres of green infrastructure. And importantly, we serve the greater Cincinnati community. Most of Hamilton County is served by MSD, and some small portions of our outside counties as well. As you can see there, we treat 160 gallons of wastewater a day, and we maintain over 3,000 miles of sewers. So in addition, I think there's on the slide the service area. There we go. You can see there our largest treatment plants, and the one in the center, the Mill Creek treatment plant, that's where I am today. That's really the primary treatment facility for the entire Cincinnati area. But again, we serve the entire greater Cincinnati community. We are a county sewer district, and I think that will be important as we go through this discussion tonight. I just wanted to mention that as a county sewer district, our authority is established under the Ohio Revised Code, and our authority and responsibility is limited in that we have ratepayer funds, and how we spend those funds is restricted. So next slide. I also wanted to provide some background on how our sewer system was built and how it operates today. Again, so we have over 3,000 miles of sanitary and combined sewers. And our sewer system was initially designed to collect wastewater from homes and buildings, but this was before we had treatment. So when our sewers were first built, the sewers were relief sewers that took the flow to our rivers, to our creeks and rivers. And then, it really was in the 50s in the Cincinnati area that we developed wastewater treatment. And so that flow was intercepted and taken to our treatment facilities as they were constructed. Most of the older parts of our city do have a combined system, which means that the storm flow, both from your homes, the downspouts, and the inlets in the streets, are all connected to the same sanitary pipe. So that is a combined sewer. And because these, when these sewers were designed, they were never designed to carry all the rainwater, even at that time. So the sewers were essentially always designed to overflow in wet weather. And we have what are called combined sewer overflows that occur. So you can see there in the top visual, very rudimentary depiction of what takes place in wet weather in the combined system. And that is, you have enough rainwater in that combined sewer that it cannot, there's not enough capacity to convey all of that to the treatment plant, and therefore it outfalls into the river. So our combined system, again, we have those overflows designed, and that is how they were intended to operate. Today, we build separate systems when we build new, and we also have had opportunities to go into the older combined areas and separate those systems. And of course, if you look at the lower visual, as you can see, in a separate system, the storm sewer is designed to discharge into the creeks and the rivers, and the sewage is designed to be conveyed to the treatment plant. And we don't have, most often, we don't have the capacity issues in our separate system, although there are exceptions to that. So you can go to the next slide. I think as many people have heard or know a little bit about, MSD is under what is called a global consent decree. And this is really in the 1970s with the enaction of the Clean Water Act. Many cities that had these older systems needed to start bringing those old infrastructure up to the current standards, recognizing that the overflows were, of course, causing pollution into our streams and rivers. And so as we have new regulations, but old systems, it is recognized that it is not something that can be done overnight. And it is, while these old systems are out of compliance, that's how they were designed. And it's very costly to change our infrastructure. So the consent decree is really a common enforcement tool that many cities are under something similar. And without getting into a lot of detail, because we could spend an entire night talking about it, I think the most important issues I wanted to share about the MSD consent decree is that the primary focus is to reduce or control our combined sewer overflows, to eliminate anywhere that there's overflows from a sanitary only system. And then also the consent decree established a sewer backup program, which we're going to talk more about. But as you can see there, we've been working on our consent decree over the past decade, and we've made a lot of progress in controlling the CSOs and the SSOs. We've seen a lot of improvements in our water quality. We still have a lot of work to do, but when it comes to those primary goals of the consent decree, we have specific projects that have all been agreed upon and that are approved by the EPA for us to complete these requirements to control and eliminate the overflows. And those are all being completed on a phased approach. That is, while the projects were predetermined, the schedule in which we must complete them will be approved over time based on what our community can afford. And that is because these projects and all of this work is funded by ratepayer dollars. We do not have federal dollars or any other funding other than the MSD sewer rates to pay for these projects. So we are making progress on that, as you can see. And again, the sewer backup program is what I'm going to talk more about on the next slide. Okay, so the sewer backup program was also created from the consent decree, and this recognized that in addition to the combined sewer and sanitary sewer overflows that occur during wet weather events, our older infrastructure also has, due to the capacity limitations, when we have these extreme storms, we get flow, we have capacity limitations, and oftentimes in extreme storms especially, there will be backup of wastewater into a property if the main sewer does not have enough capacity to convey that flow. So it's similar as the combined sewer overflow we shared on the prior slide. So the sewer backup program, recognizing that this can occur in people's homes, required MSD to do three things, really. So the first is to have a customer service response program so that when an individual had water in their basement, MSD would be required to respond, to investigate, and to clean up that sewer backup if it was determined to be caused by inadequate capacity of our sewer system. The program also covers any negligent operation of our public system. But importantly, what it does not cover, and in fact, the consent decree specifically excludes, is any sewer backup or any water that's in the basement that is caused by overland flooding that did not come from MSD's sewer system, or any blockage or failure of an individual's building sewer. So to be eligible for our cleanup and then the two additional components here, again, it has to be an eligible backup under that program, or else MSD cannot address the problem. So the second component of the program is the Sbu Claims Process, and this requires us to reimburse owners for damages to their property that are incurred as a result of wastewater into their buildings. So essentially, if it's an eligible Sbu and there's damages, we have a damage claim process. And third, the Sbu prevention program requires MSD to install a protection device to prevent future backups. Again, a property must be eligible, and here the Sbu prevention program does not apply until you've had at least 2 sewer backups in a 5-year period. I think as I'm going over all of these, I think what is apparent is that this program is reactive. It is what we must do, once sewer backups have occurred. And there really is nothing about the consent decree sewer backup program that requires or even considers MSD providing a more holistic approach or proactive approach to prevent sewer backups. So again, the prevention program doesn't even come into play until after a property has had 2 or more backups. And the solution is a single property solution just to prevent the backup on that property. As you can see, the total dollars spent on this program since it was established in 2004 is over $150 million. That is a large amount of money. And if you go to the next slide, it'll break it down how that how those dollars have been spent on this program. So the customer service request, that's the number of calls that we receive under our sewer backup program. And we investigate all of those. If it's determined to be a sewer backup, as you can see, then the cleanings that have been offered to those eligible properties are over 10,000. Now, not everyone moves forward with MSD performing the cleaning. So we performed a few less than what has been offered or what was eligible. And then the settlements, those are the claims that we've paid for damages. So, 4,553 claims paid. And then the prevention program, we have installed prevention devices or a prevention system in over 1,000 properties. But when you look at all of those numbers and you see, we've really only reached a little over 1,000 properties, and the total dollars we've spent on that prevention program alone is over $55 million. And the average cost for a solution per property is $46,000. Those numbers, quite simply, aren't sustainable. And we do continue to, the county commissioners continue to budget for the SBU program, and we continue to perform as required. But it is certainly apparent that, the amount of money that we are putting into this is not really providing the results that I think the community and MSD wants to see from our investment. So we really want to find new solutions. So if you can go to the next slide, though, I have more to demonstrate on the existing program. Okay, so in July, and actually it was June 30th, July 1st, there was an extreme event. I think part of the reason why we've convened this meeting here. And this is, as you can see, I think Michael Forrester shared this visual just of the storm itself. So you can see this is a heat map of the storm that occurred and where we received the heaviest flow or the heaviest rainfall, sorry. And all of the dots, whether they're dots or stars, represent calls that we received from individuals with sewer backups. So the total number of calls was over 500 from this event. And then they are broken down to show whether they were SBUs that occurred within our combined sewer area or outside of our combined sewer area. And that's something that we really wanted to dig into this data to look at what happened. So in the northern portions were really where you see the blue dots. Those are sewer backups that were investigated and confirmed to be eligible for our program. However, those are actually in separated areas. So it's not exclusive, again, that this problem is strictly in our combined sewer area. You can also see the large cluster of red or orange, depending on your screen, dots that are in the east side of Cincinnati, where we had a really significant number of sewer backups. And in this event in particular, we had 240 or more of the calls that were eligible for our sewer backup program, meaning that cleaning services were provided and they'll be eligible for damage claims. The stars indicate those properties that were determined not to be eligible for our sewer backup program. And typically, these were properties where we determined it was overland flooding and outside the scope of our program. This event, the other thing I want to mention is this event, again, we're calling it an extreme storm because of the recurrence intervals that you can see that we had over what we had 100-year in these few areas. A lot of areas saw a 50, 25-year storm. And our sewers just simply weren't designed to convey flow of that, of that magnitude. And, I think that this storm is also a good example of, why we can't build our way out of this problem, because sewers today would not be built to manage this flow, even if we had new systems. And that's, what's indicated here and what's apparent as you look and see that the sewer backups were also occurring in separated areas. So next slide. Okay, so what causes the water in basements and the sewer backups? Again, that was a visual of where we discovered or where we investigated and determined they were sewer backups or they were not sewer backups. And really, these are the primary reasons. And the capacity or mainline blockage, that's the sewer backup that MSD is providing services for under our sewer backup program. And this visual just shows you how, we're investigating and what we see. We have the main sewer there on the left side in the street. There is enough surcharge in that sewer that the water is backing up into the property. And, you have here, significant amount of water getting in the home. So this would be, an indication that our sewer did not have capacity to carry the flow, and therefore we would be responsible for the backup. What we often see are two other reasons why property is backed up. One is very common, and that's some blockage in the building sewer. So the sewer from that main sewer to your property, call it a building sewer, we call it a lateral sewer, that oftentimes will have a blockage. This can happen from tree roots. It can happen from things people put down their sewers that they shouldn't put down their drains, like fats, oils, greases, flushable wipes that you should not ever flush down your drain. Those things cause blockages, and this is a very common reason for a backup. And then overland flooding, which we've already talked about some, and I'm going to talk more about. If overland flooding is getting into your property, sometimes through a window well, foundations, sometimes it's your internal plumbing. If water, it oftentimes comes down a recessed driveway. If water is coming into your property, but our sewer has capacity, then we will determine that it's overland flooding and we cannot provide services under the sewer backup program. I'll get into a little bit more detail on how we make that determination on the next slide. Okay, so, and this is just, some really the steps in our process. I think first and foremost, how we make the determination of a sewer backup, of the cause of the sewer backup. First, we need you to report. So MSD does not know that sewers has backed up. I think there is sometimes a belief that we would somehow, know where the system is surcharged. It requires calls from you when this happens. So we can take calls any time of day or night, 24/7 to our hotline. It's 352-4900. You can also report a sewer backup on our website. And once that is called in, then we create a work order and we have a dispatcher assigned to get out to that property as quickly as possible. The crews that come out to the sites, they will investigate the main sewer by inspecting the upstream and downstream manholes. And what they're looking for is signs of surcharging. So this can be by debris that's evident inside the manhole. We also have what are called float level indicators installed in many of the manholes throughout our system. And we can, in some properties, we also will have a clean out on your building sewer lateral that also may have an indication of whether there is a surcharge or not. Although in the last year we have limited entrance into homes, our crews will typically also go into the home and just investigate the damages from inside the property. But typically the determination is made based on those upstream, downstream manholes and additional evidence outside the property. Once we know if there's multiple downstream manholes surcharged, we can make a determination that there may be a large scale capacity issue. If our crews, find evidence of any kind of a blockage, we can also send out services to try to remove that blockage and clear it right there, during that time. Once the field investigation is complete, the crew will advise the customer whether or not they are eligible for services from MSD or if they need to call a plumber. If it's an overland flooding issue or a stormwater problem where another jurisdiction may be responsible, we will make that contact or provide that contact for the individual. Once the crews are finished with their work, we have a supervisor that will review all of this information, and they will also be able to compare it to additional investigations that are taking place in the area to make sure that everything was properly evaluated for the investigation. If you can go to the next slide, I think. So that's the follow-up review. Sometimes we may need to go out and do additional actions. We may need to actually investigate, doing a TV investigation of the sewer, again, clearing debris. And if it's an eligible SBU, we will provide cleaning services. And finally, our response times are tracked, and it's our goal to get to properties as quickly as possible. We really want to get there, within an hour, if possible. In some of the larger storms, we do see longer times, sometimes more than 4 hours. But as you can see, our goal and our performance is typically less than 2 hours. Now, I wanted to just reiterate a little bit more about overland flooding and what we have seen in many of these storms, and the properties that have reported a sewer backup, have a lot of water inside and outside their home, but that is, it is not a qualifying sewer backup. So to be clear, MSD will respond to all calls that come into our hotline, and we will make the determination as to whether or not the sewer surcharged or contributed to the water in the basement. The pictures that you see here are examples of overland flooding, or a stormwater flow that is not related to the capacity of our sewer. That water did not come out of our sewer. And whether or not it got into these homes or not, we're not going to be able to address those problems for those homeowners. Some of these, as Eric said, are private property issues, and some of them, there may be another jurisdiction, the local stormwater utility. So for MSD, if we're in the city of Cincinnati, we will work with stormwater management utility and Eric, but in the other jurisdictions outside of the city of Cincinnati, it may be, a different stormwater responsibility. But most importantly, MSD cannot spend our dollars, and we cannot address these issues because we do not have the authority to respond to these problems when they were not a result of our sewer and capacity. Okay, you can move to the next slide. So what are we doing? And this is where I think, as we wrap up here, I think a lot of the comments that I saw before I started speaking, I think everyone wants to know what we are doing different if the current program isn't preventing and isn't providing solutions for everyone. MSD really is trying to enhance our sewer backup program and look at things differently, given the resources and the cost of the program to date. We understand that if we continue to solve problems the same way, we aren't making a lot of progress in certain areas. So some of the different approaches that we're looking at. The East Side SBU mitigation study. This is something that was just initiated this year. This is really doing a deeper dive into the sewer backups that have occurred in areas of the East Side where we don't have an existing project that would address the sewer backups in these neighborhoods. Instead, the default solution, as I mentioned earlier, is really just to address these property by property after they have 2 or more sewer backups, and then going in with a solution just for that individual property and installing, a prevention device. If we do that, sometimes in these concentrated areas of sewer backups, we may actually make the problem worse for other properties in that same local community. So what we're doing with the mitigation study here is to look at these clusters, if you will, where we know we have sewer backups occurring, and looking to identify other solutions. These could be small separation projects, other small capital improvement projects to improve the existing infrastructure that we have there. Right now, we're in the very early stages of this, but the good thing is we have we've been gathering this data over the last several years and collecting data in a different way than we had the capability to before. So we can really hone in on the areas that are impacted in smaller storms. So not that extreme storm that we saw, but the areas that are getting backups, in the smaller storms, and identify priorities for solutions. Another example of an alternative approach, which is really what we're kind of mirroring in the East Side study, is an existing project in a Mount Washington neighborhood where we had an abundance of sewer backups on just a couple streets. So we really had close to 50 properties that were eligible for our sewer backup prevention program. And we knew that the traditional approach of going house by house and installing prevention devices, again, would maybe help that homeowner, but potentially increase risk for other properties that had not had backups. So we looked for an alternative solution, and that project is in the design phase, and it is a project where we'll be installing new storm sewers upstream of our combined system. So that's one where, again, it's an alternative to what the consent decree required us to do under the sewer backup program. In the Muddy Creek FEMA project, these are properties in Muddy Creek that had recurring sewer backups, but there really was no engineering solution because of the amount of overland flow. So we really had to look for, the possibility of purchasing those properties. The cost of that is very, is a large cost for MSD to bear on its own. And therefore we were able to, take advantage of this FEMA grant and use these dollars to go in and acquire properties. It is all voluntary acquisition of properties. And then MSD will do a project to use the properties for green infrastructure or some other stormwater management. And then finally, and this goes into the next page, we are continuing to look for other tools for our toolbox, both for MSD and for our customers. We have been developing this under our pilot this year, and we hope to have more to roll out to the community here soon. If you go to the next slide, some of the strategies that we're evaluating. And some of these are things that MSD can do, and some of these that our property owners can do. So building lateral strategies, trying to help the public understand that there are things that they can do and not to wait for, a sewer backup to occur. Some things like purchasing insurance or just inspecting your sewer lateral to make sure that it is free from defects. Other communication strategies that MSD has in place, really just to provide people with advanced, information to reduce risk prior to storms. There are many things people can do before wet weather comes to protect their property. And then MSD incentive programs. This is, we really are looking at what other communities, what other cities in the area and in our state have done, and incentive programs have been successful for helping property owners take action on their own to perhaps proactively install prevention devices. And this is something where we're developing framework, but we need to determine, what MSD can do and how that would be approved under our existing governance structure. Operational controls. This is part of our pilot this year. We have a few areas where we have done very focused controls on our system to control the flow of the stormwater before it gets to our combined sewer. So perhaps holding it back for a short period of time in a storm and not allowing it to directly enter our sewer. Other complementary initiatives. So a couple of things to mention. One would be that we are undertaking a study for impervious surface fees, for an impervious surface fee to be incorporated into our rate structure. That's a joint initiative with the county. And we've proposed revisions to our existing detention requirements, and those are also under review with the county. And next slide. So this is just more on some of the things that we we have been sharing with property owners and some of our existing campaigns that will be part of our SBU mitigation toolbox for property owners. And just more tips for folks to take away, things you can do proactively. Reviewing your insurance coverage, making sure you have lateral insurance if you don't, understanding if you're in a combined sewer area, what that means to you and what that risk is, providing people with information about floods and flood insurance, and also advising people prior to high risk events. And again, perhaps people, if they are in a high risk area, want to consider proactively installing a backflow device on their property. Insurance, as I mentioned, and also things that people should be doing before they even buy a home to inspect their laterals. Finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is, in addition to the folks that are here today, the MSD has been working with a lot of other organizations, both in the city of Cincinnati and outside. These are some of our partners. We have many more, but one of the best solutions to these problems, or really the best solution, is to look for regional partnerships. And MSD wants to be part of your project, part of the solution. So if we are at the table when projects are taking place and prior to reconstruction activities, then we can address some of these issues with a lot of solutions, as mentioned here on this slide. The zoo is one in particular that the zoo has been a great partner and has come to MSD prior to undertaking their own capital projects to look at ways that we can partner to have a greater effect on reducing stormwater in the combined sewer system, and therefore improving our overall performance. I think that brings me to the end, and I know we need to leave time for questions, so I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Lynn Loader, who can jump into questions or call on folks.
Yeah, actually,
Thank
I think, John, did you want to introduce? We have one other person here, a council member, Keating. John, did you want to introduce?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, to the city team, and I hope that was helpful to everyone on the call. I did want to turn it over to Councilwoman Liz Keating, because she is really the impetus for bringing us together tonight, and I'm really grateful that she did. And I just wanted to offer her quickly a little time to speak, and then any questions she may have before we open it up. So thank you all, and without further ado, Councilwoman Keating.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending tonight, being part of this discussion. And I particularly want to thank John and Michael, Eric, Art, Diana, and Mary Lynn for all your work going into this. I also want to acknowledge your teams. Your teams have worked nonstop, around the clock, particularly since that July flooding, to help address the concerns of the community. And I know these experiences have been extremely frustrating and for some absolutely devastating, but I consistently hear that the teams who are talking to our community members have had positive experiences and have just said they're great people to work with. So I just want to publicly acknowledge you and your teams at the city for all your work. So thank you. To everyone listening, thank you for all of those who have reached out, who have talked to us, who have shared their concerns. It's because of you that we were able to do this tonight, and we will constantly be working to address all of those concerns. We've heard from homeowners who can no longer get home insurance because of all of these issues that they constantly have, from businesses who have to consistently throw out product and start back over every time it floods. And we've heard from landlords who can no longer lease out their spaces because people don't want to come knowing that there are flooding issues. This is part of the basic services that us as a city are in charge of providing to you. And this is something that I know the city and the administration is working extremely hard, as we heard tonight, and me as a council member and my colleagues will continue to push to make sure we are addressing those concerns. I had 3 frequently asked questions that I hear from Cincinnatians all the time. 2 of them were addressed tonight. That was the East Side study that Diana talked about. the backflow prevention and how that is more of a Band-Aid and not a long-term solution. And Diana addressed that one as well. And the third one was kind of addressed, but I wanted to get a little bit more specific because this one has been coming up a lot more in terms of when there are sewer backups and you're getting the sewer backup within the yards. Not every neighbor has the ability or the capacity to clean their yards, and that's becoming a health issue, particularly for children, a quality of life issue, particularly with the smell. And in some areas, it's becoming a problem because it's attracting a lot of rodents. So what can the city do to help in terms of being able to clean that up or enforcing cleanup and making sure it's done in a sanitary way to protect our neighbors? And I'm not sure if that is directly.
Council member, thank you. I will give it a stab. I think, thank you for the questions and your comments as well. That's really, that particular issue has not been a frequently raised concern to us, at least, not something that has come to me recently, but I can speak to it in the sense that, when properties are experiencing sewer backups, it is typically, in these wet weather events, whether it's an extreme storm like we had, but, some rain event, and the water that might be on their property, if there was a manhole that was surcharging, to cause there to be debris left on the property, is typically very diluted. And with any kind of flood event where the sewers were surcharging, we would also have a lot of just street flooding, standing water, and that brings a lot of other problems. We see a lot of risks just from having standing water. There's a lot of chemicals that are washed up, just a lot of debris and trash. And so it's tough to isolate it to a sewer problem that would, be debris just from the sanitary sewer that would really be causing problems in the yard. And typically, whatever would have come up from the sewer would be something that, just being exposed to the air and the sun really would help alleviate any of the pathogens or problems from the sewage. So I think it's something we can certainly look into, but unless others have comments, that's really the best I can provide at this point. I think the other thing though is if we're aware of a manhole having surcharged, if that's part of something that was reported to us, or we, had the detection of that, MSD would clean that. So we would have responsibility if it, was something that came from our manhole and surcharged. But if it's part of an overall flood and all the other debris involved, we certainly wouldn't be involved in all of that cleanup.
Thank you for that. And thank you again for all of you for putting this on and for answering questions. And to all those who are listening tonight, if we don't get to your questions, if you do still have questions, you have all the contact information on the screen. You also can reach out to my office and we will do our best to be able to get you answers. Thank you again for participating, and thank you so much to our administration who has been working so hard on this to be able to have long-term solutions for us.
Thank you very much, Council Member, for your comments and those questions. I'm going to, this is Mary Lynn Loader again. I'm going to turn back to some of the questions. We have answered a number of questions in the Q&A chat, but there are some other questions too that I can refer to. We will also try to take these questions and turn them into kind of like an FAQ of sorts that we can incorporate into, for MSD questions. We could put some responses out on our website. We do have a website that's listed on the bottom of this screen that's on the screen right now. This is kind of a shared website of sorts that MSD is hosting, but it's specifically for this event. So you will be able to get this recording there and also some additional resources that we have up there as well. I'm going to go to a question that I think Diane Eisman had her hand up, and Eric, if you can go ahead and unmute Diane, she can ask her question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We were the property that bore the brunt of that Grandin View property landslide tsunami that came down Golden Hollow Avenue and then Golden Avenue. That retention pond is not retaining water for 12 to 24 hours when there are these large storm events, despite the fact that it was built to the 25-year storm standard. What can we do? Can the city help us get them to build a berm or some way to slow that water? Because on June 20th, it came down again in a tsunami and came halfway up our driveway. I almost had a heart attack again every time we have one of these storm events. All our property outside was flooded. And if that rain lasted 5 more minutes, it would have gone into our house.
I will I'll get with one of my engineers in the morning, Diane, and we'll have somebody out there. And I think I have your contact information through one of my engineers you've worked with in the past.
Yes.
And I'll be reaching out to you, and we'll come out there and meet you and look at the situation.
Okay, I greatly appreciate that because it's very scary.
You're very welcome. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diane and Eric. There's another question on the chat. What is the definition? I think this is good for you, Eric. Can you provide a definition of overland flooding?
Sure. I mean, I think in general, overland flooding deals with like the sheet flow of water. It can come, the surface can be saturated, the ground can be saturated, and you see it just running down. It can be coming from a hillside and then running into a valley. And then in turn, it hits a swale or a creek. And obviously the creek, for instance, cannot handle it. And it comes out of its banks. And then you have overland flooding from a creek as well. So it can be from different sources. It can be from private to private. It can come off the public right away and jump a curb and cause some overland flooding, or it can come from private property that's not being controlled well and hit the public right away as well. I hope I answered that question.
Okay, thank you, Eric. There's another question, and Diana, maybe you can answer this. When a major storm happens, could you have a group ticket for all the houses instead of all of these one-off tickets? And I think this is specifically related to like our wastewater collection investigations that we're doing. Those crews are just going to that one house. Do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to answer that?
Well, I have I can speak to that. And Marilyn, please feel free to chime in. When the crews are dispatched as best as we can, we try to use a crew in the area that they're in, but really just depending on the calls, it isn't always feasible. We may have people showing up at different times in that location. But we do, once we have looked at a street and determined that there is a capacity issue, that information is relevant when we go back and do the review of all of the field investigations. So, we really don't want to limit our crews from responding to every call by making a determination and not actually investigating each individual property. But that, at least if that's the way I understand the question, we don't make a blanket determination, but in a sense, that information is all relevant. And sometimes we learn more when we look at the complete picture, once the supervisor has time to look at our field investigations. And Mary Lynn, with your experience as well, there might be more to add.
No, I think you hit it right on the head. I just wanted to make sure. I'll go on to the next question. Please, I think this is for BNI and SMU. Can you be a little bit more specific about what BNI and SMU do differently from 2016, and what about Department of Transportation?
So I'll take a first shot at that and Art chime in. I think what Art alluded to after the storm events of that year, is that we really brought our coordination together. There was some duplication of work, some crossover work, and we formed a team and got ourselves organized, and we strengthened our erosion control standards. We trained B&I staff to inspect those erosion control standards and to properly enforce them. And because of that, we have seen a significant reduction in even, small, mid-sized storms of negatively impacting people. What was the second part of the question?
What about transportation, Department of Transportation? How are they linked in?
Yes, thank you. So we work with the Department of Transportation and even the Hamilton County Engineer's Office as well on how the stormwater runs off the street, where it flows to, controlling it properly. They are involved in various site projects and coordination of projects. They certainly do not operate in a silo. We work with them on literally a daily basis, controlling and conveying the stormwater in the streets and the public right of way.
Okay, great.
Mary Lynn, I'll just chime in a little bit. I think one of the major ways is, especially from the erosion sediment control side, we've moved from a reactive approach to a very proactive approach. So the moment we know that a storm's coming in, we're starting to look at all of these projects, physically look at all these projects, not just go through what permits we have, but physically go out there, look to make sure that we have the development sites in the best possible position to be able to contain the rainwater that's coming. And I think that is a fundamental change from where we were pre 2016.
Okay, there's another question that's, I think, a good relation to it. When will the city policy or regulations require the use of permeable surfaces where appropriate and use other measures to direct stormwater to vegetated areas instead of pipes under streets? Eric, do you want to take a stab at that? I think maybe your regulations might.
Yeah, I think, essentially we look at that along with, I mentioned DOTE as well. We look at that a lot with them. And, certainly when that is appropriate and when that can work, it's sort of one of those tools in our toolbox. Yeah, I mean, that green infrastructure, permeable pavement are options that are looked at in every single project that we do. And I'm confident I can speak with DOT for them when I say that as well.
Okay. There's another question, Diana, for you. Maybe MSD paid for neighbor's claim, but not ours. How do you figure out what person gets paid a claim if 10 houses all go through one line and 2 downstream are backing up? Wouldn't it be a sewer backup? I know that's hard to answer in just a simple way, but I know you can handle it.
Yes. It is, I know that property owners are frustrated when they hear that. And I think that the simplest response is that each property is unique. And we performed an investigation and looked at, what was occurring on that property. And depending on where your lowest level of your building is, your basement, and where your lateral is located, it is very possible that your neighbor could have had a backup from the sewer and you have not. Again, that's all part of our investigation, and we do look at each property individually, and then we do provide that review where we also look at what we've seen on the rest of the street before we make a final determination. But the claims process follows the same eligibility requirements. So, you would not be eligible for a claim if you did not have a qualifying sewer backup.
Okay. Another question. What is MSD's plan to get stormwater out of the combined sewer? What are the quantitative goals? Do you want to try to take that, Diana?
Sure. I mean, removing stormwater from the combined system is one way to address the combined sewer overflows that are required under the consent decree. So I think part of the question was, what are the what are the measures or metrics? But, you know, again, it goes back to what we're under an obligation to address in terms of reducing or controlling the combined sewer overflows. So when we look at when you look at the projects that were determined, some of those are projects that are designed to remove stormwater from the combined system, or to, you know, at least hold it in a detention for a period of time to allow the combined system to have capacity once the wet weather has passed. Whereas other solutions would be to increase capacity or to improve, you know, reliability of the existing system. So it's certainly one of our you know, it's one solution, but it's going to depend on the particular problem at hand.
Okay, great. Okay, we're at 8 o'clock, and but I think we can ask just a couple more questions. We do have some more here, but, and again, we won't be able to get to all of them. But let's see, there's another question. Can you speak about any studies or mitigation plan for businesses in the 3400 block of Edwards Road in Hyde Park between Observatory and Erie? I don't know if anybody on the panel has any specific information about any ongoing current studies or mitigation plan for businesses of the 3400 block on Edwards Road. If not, we can take that back and try to get a response. We've got the name of the person and can look back at that. Another one is an ancient creek was routed through an underground culvert. It joins a combined sewer. When this overflows and causes surface flooding, is this an SMU or an MSD responsibility? So an ancient creek is routed to an underground culvert. It joins a combined sewer. When it overflows and causes surface flooding, is this SMU or MSD responsibility? And I think this is probably both, really is unique. It requires an on-site investigation, but Eric or Diana, do either one of you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
No, you were first.
Yeah, I think, Marilyn, the way I can answer that is I would want to look at the situation and look at the ownership of the infrastructure and so forth. It's a good question, an interesting question, but it's very broad. And so I would have to go out there and look at the situation and do some research and to determine where the responsibilities lie.
That's similar to what I would say, Eric. It's really tough to make a general, you know, response there, just given the, you know, the unknowns, and we would have to investigate. I mean, what we're looking at is what is the, you know, what is the asset that's overflowing? What is actually overflowing? So again, it needs to be a surcharge of wastewater and coming from an MSD, you know, asset for it to be an MSD responsibility. So without knowing exactly what's taking place, it's hard to determine.
If the person can go ahead and provide that, you know, specific information, if I can talk to us, that would be great. And then we can look into that.
Yeah, and I did put the email address in there again. If we can have your email, type your question into an email, we can have somebody investigate that
Yes.
and look more closely at it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see.
We have an additional hand raised, by the way.
Okay, great.
Lisa Camello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you everyone for doing this. I just had a question as far as the East Side study. And is there an expected completion date of that, with time being of the essence for this area? And when it is completed, or along the lines of previous studies in other areas, is there an expected outcome or solution? Again, with time being of the essence in this area, with the multiple sewer backups, 3 or more within 1 year.
So Lisa, thank you for your question. I wish I had a firm date. Again, this is a study. So the study is looking at areas that we've identified as clusters of sewer backups or risks of sewer backups in these more frequent storm events, not necessarily the extreme events, and looking for solutions. So, it'll be being conducted over the next several months and into next year. And from there, we hope to identify priorities and priority projects that can be implemented, in the near term, but, meaning, construction projects. So really many of them, really looking at several years for a project to be identified and then designed and constructed, and all of the approval processes that go along the way. So, I know everyone wishes we could move faster, but I'm at least pleased that we're starting in this direction and that it's underway.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we do have more questions, but we do want to be respectful of people's times, but we do have the questions, and we could respond through email as follow-ups. And I'm seeing, some redundant questions, but don't know if we want to continue on. John, is there a preference of how much longer you'd like to go?
Yeah, I think if there's one or two more questions, that would be fine, but we are past our allotted time, and I do want to be respectful of everyone, and I really appreciate some great questions tonight, so thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. So I'll take this last one. I understand that it is perhaps too much here to include, but there are other programs looking at groundwater flooding. Many areas built on shale, clay composites demonstrate some significant laminar flows. It would seem, I'm thinking of College Hill, there are some basements flood through walls in the absence of overland flooding, but I'm sure there are other areas based on overall geology. So that's actually just a comment. So we will compile these, we will go through these and try to follow up individually. And where we have some common frequently asked questions, we'll put those together as well. I do want to thank everybody for attending, particularly our panelists and all of you. This is an issue that I think all of the agencies here are committed to addressing. Some other comments or questions were, why wasn't transportation here? Why wasn't the county here? The fact is that I think there actually are some of those entities on the call here. We did reach out to some other agencies beforehand. I know that Hamilton County EMA is on. They've got a upcoming multi-hazard mitigation planning effort starting again. It's an update of that significant plan to be completed in 2023. I spoke with Ryan McEwen a couple days ago, and extreme storms or resiliency is going to be a major chapter of that effort potentially. And I think that all of us are going to be working even much more closely on the opportunity for new and more innovative solutions. And I don't think this is going to be the end of the conversation. I think there's a lot more to look at other communities. I know Michael is actively looking at what other communities are doing on this issue of resiliency and bringing those examples here. MSD is excited about the mitigation toolbox, looking at new and different ways, and the East Side study and other things. And Eric's got some new regulations he's working through. And the coordination that Art's been doing, we're going to be leaning on many others. So again, thank you for your time, and we will update the website with the recording here as well as the slides. There's going to be some more resources there, and please just stay tuned in, and hopefully we will continue to be able to be more proactive than we have been in the past. But it is going to take an effort of not only the agencies, but individuals, both residents, businesses, all getting on the same page of how we address this major issue that we have as a community. But again, as Michael said, it's not just happening here locally, it's happening nationally as well. And so we need to be looking at more innovative solutions that'll get us what we're actually after, which is a better, more prosperous greater Cincinnati region that can manage the issues that we have in these extreme storms. So thank you very much, and please check the website for the recording and for additional information. Thank you.